So Nintendo just showcased a Nindies Direct. We only found out about it 2 days ago. And in this Direct we got some nice surprises. The first of which was Cuphead being ported to Switch. I mean, I've personally yet to play that game, but it's a critically acclaimed game that won awards. So it's kind of big news to see it come over, especially seeing as it sounds like it's quite hard to get the port over. And it has subsequently been announced that it runs 1080p, 60 frames per second, pretty much akin to the Xbox One version, which is great news. Next up, Nintendo also announced Stranger Things 3, the game, which looks a bit like a Streets of Rage style 16-bit game in a more isometric layout with some adventure aspects to it, and pretty cool. It looks like it's co-op all the way through. But they announced a number of games, but I want to get into the meat and bones of what I want to discuss today, and that is the last game they announced, which is Cadence of Hyrule, Crypt of the Necrodancer. Now this is featuring The Legend of Zelda. Now this is kind of big news to me. We have not only another developer which is getting hands-on with Nintendo IP, which is quite rare anyway, although a bit more common in recent years and historically. It's an indie developer, and it's a game that doesn't have a legacy around it. It's essentially a hit from, I think, 2015, and yet here Nintendo is allowing one of their most important IP to be handled by this developer, which I believe is Brace Yourself Games. Now what's interesting is it isn't just the characters. It looks like the world is essentially, was in the name, Cadence of Hyrule, and the characters and the music and the whole aesthetic and the environments are all built around Hyrule. This is kind of unusual. I mean, you're talking about a game with not much history. I mean, it's only becoming a franchise now, I suppose, when it's releasing the second one in the series. So whatever the developer was doing before them, it must have impressed Nintendo massively, or Miyamoto personally perhaps, because I mean, Zelda is his baby after all. Or it could be Eiji Onomura. But this game is, from what I understand, having not played the original, a rhythm musically themed based game. So the world moves in kind of like a turn-based strategy style game, but it's moving constantly and at a fast rate, and you have to make a decision, I suppose, on the beat or off the beat as it goes on. It kind of fits in that respect, in the sense that Zelda and Nintendo IP in general tend to have iconic music which resonates well with the fan base. It's very emotive, and a lot of games, I mean, when you look at Super Mario Bros, the enemies and the wave of the gameplay tends to be built around the rhythm or the pace of the music. So in that respect, I can kind of see these two concepts marry up quite well. But again, I reiterate my point that it's unusual. Nintendo lends its IP to other developers. I mean, you only have to look at the Dynasty Warrior spin-off games like Hyrule Warriors or Fire Emblem Warriors, I believe it's called. They've also allowed other studios to develop their games. So we've had Capcom develop a number of Zelda games on the Game Boy Advance, Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, and the Minish Cap. But we haven't really seen Nintendo hand off their property in a way like this before, where they're going, hey, you know, you have this property yourself, and we're going to mash our IP into it, but it's still going to be essentially your game, made by you, but you have complete access to all of this world and this art and this music and these enemy designs and essentially this 30-year-old brand that has history and weight behind it. And I know that Nintendo has done the odd puzzle game with Nintendo characters made by other studios, or smaller pick up and play titles that they've sort of overlaid the art style and general music into the game itself. But this feels much more like a fully fleshed game. Again, still small game in comparison to like a AAA Switch game, but it's still a game with distinct identity that has gameplay aspects which are more intricate and complicated than the average, say, puzzle game where you're just moving blocks around or solving simple brain teasers. Now, this game also, by its design and its visual style, looks like a Zelda game, or looks like a game that may have been released in the era of when Zelda A Link to the Past came out, for example. So what makes this particularly unusual is that it's hard to distinguish this from it being developed by Nintendo, or being, you know, a Nintendo first party or second party studio. And this is the key thing which I think makes this the most unusual, is because Nintendo, as we know, recent years have been very strict and very forceful, bringing down a legal hammer in regards to their intellectual property, because they want to keep the value of their property high. They want to keep the quality of their products at the highest that they can be, or at least what the fans expect from their products. So not having this clear distinction, which is what Nintendo tends to pride itself on, is the most shocking thing here. Now, I've said this previously many times over in the last couple of years at least, that the Nintendo we're seeing post Iwata, or rather just before the Switch launched, in the announcement of the Switch, is a new Nintendo. We're seeing a much more lax behaviour with their IP. Movies have been announced, which it almost swore never to go back on, having burned themselves once with that previously. We've got theme parks coming out. We've got a Nintendo that appears to be playing nice and playing ball with its competitors, and opening the doors to indie developers with open arms, as evidenced by this actual discussion I'm having now. So it bodes well for the future of Nintendo, that they seem to be more receptive to feedback, more receptive to what the fans want or what the fans would like to see, but also much more receptive to the idea of playing around with their IP. And then I suppose there is the biggest comparison to this announcement, which is Mario vs Rabbids by Ubisoft, which is kind of similar in the sense that we have the general aesthetic and environment, music, all taken from their biggest IP in Mario, and handed over to an external developer to let them build the game that they want with this IP sort of shoehorned in, and that turned out fantastic. So perhaps that was the catalyst for them making a decision like this. Bodes very well for developers on the Switch. I mean, this is a very positive sign. This will probably radiate well out into the community. We've seen Shovel Knight in Smash Brothers, and a couple other references here or there. I mean, Amiibo for Shovel Knight as well. So it's good steps from Nintendo, having come through, I would argue, like a darker patch with their IP, where there's just this cloud of negativity around slamming down the legal hammer and protecting their property at all costs. So hopefully this sort of changes the landscape somewhat, and we will hopefully see a Nintendo which is a bit more forthcoming and a bit more receiving to the fans and their love and passions for their products. You know, fan projects may almost certainly continue to be shut down, but perhaps maybe instead of just shutting them down and throwing up a legal notice, we might see a bit more positivity in reciprocating some of that love, and maybe allowing fans, or even you know, developers who try to make a name for themselves to give it a shot with their properties. I mean, I accept that's highly unlikely, but this is kind of big news for me, so I just felt that it was worth discussing, and I just want to get that out there. So tell me what you guys think, and be sure to hit likes and subscribe if you like this video, and as always, stay switched on.